Well, welcome back to continue the discussion, Genesis 46. Genesis 46 isn't just a travel itinerary or a list of names. It's a profound turning point in the biblical story. And if we pause long enough to look beneath the surface, we'll see that it's full of theological tension, covenant drama, and ancient cultural resonance. Let's start with the setting. For the patriarchs, Canaan wasn't just home, it was the land God promised. So to move to Egypt isn't casual. It raises, a serious theological question. Is Israel about to abandon the promise? To Jacob, who has lived his entire life in the light of covenant, this had to feel like a step backward, which makes God's appearance in verse 2 to 4 all the more significant. When God says, do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, he's speaking into covenant anxiety. The Hebrew verb here is yareh, to fear, to dread. It's the same root used in earlier stories when patriarchs faced famine or violence. But here, it's not fear of enemies, it's fear of the unknown. And God answers it with covenant clarity. I will go down with you, and I will surely bring you back again. This echoes his earlier promises to Abraham in Genesis 15, 13 through 14, and sets the theological framework for Exodus. God isn't abandoning the land, he's orchestrating a detour. But it's more than that. This moment also marks a massive cultural and symbolic shift. God is leading his chosen people into a foreign empire. Egypt, in the Egyptian world, wasn't just a superpower, it was a place of spiritual tension. In later Jewish tradition, Egypt becomes a symbol of bondage, idolatry, and exile. So the fact that God endorses this move says something important. Sometimes preservation requires transition. And sometimes the next stage of redemption begins in a place we didn't expect. Now let's talk about genealogy. In verses 8 through 27, it might seem dry on the surface, but in the Hebrew Bible, genealogies aren't filler. They're theology. This list reinforces the 12 sons of Jacob and their descendants, emphasizing that Israel is now a full-fledged people, not just a family. The total number 70 is symbolic. In ancient Semitic numerology, 70 often represents completeness or totality. Later in Exodus 1:5, that number is quoted again to remind us that this was the seed from which the entire nation grew. And in Deuteronomy 10:22, the comparison is even clearer. Your ancestors went down to Egypt, 70 in all, and now the Lord your God has made you as numerous as the stars in the sky. So Genesis 46 is not just a logistical movement. It's the birth of a nation in exile. Joseph's role in all this is worth pausing over. He doesn't just reunite with his father, he stages a careful political maneuver. When he advises his family to emphasize their shepherd identity, he's protecting their cultural separation from the Egyptians. The Egyptians despised shepherds, Genesis 43:34, which seems ironic since Israel's entire patriarchal history revolves around herding flocks. But this disgust ends up serving a divine purpose. It ensures that Israel will remain distinct. That is huge. Had they been absorbed into Egyptian urban society, the covenant line might have been culturally erased within a generation. Instead, they settle in Goshen, a fertile but separate region where they can grow and thrive without losing themselves. That's not just smart, it's sacred strategy. Another aspect that deserves attention is the emotional reunion between Joseph and Jacob. In verse 29, it says, Joseph presented himself to him, fell on his neck, and wept a long time. This recalls Joseph's earlier weeping in chapter 45, but this time it's Jacob's sorrow being healed. The Hebrew phrase, waibek od, he wept more or again, carries a depth of release. It's not just reunion, it's resurrection. Jacob, who once said, I will go down to my son mourning in Genesis 37:35, now sees that God has restored what was lost. It reminds us that grief in the Bible isn't erased, it's redeemed. The pain doesn't disappear, but it's reinterpreted in the light of God's faithfulness. There's also a small but important theological moment in verse 30, when Jacob says, "Now I can die since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." This echoes the language used by Simeon in Luke 2:29-30, when he sees the infant Jesus. "Now, Lord, you may dismiss your servant in peace, for my eyes have seen your salvation." In both cases, seeing the living hope becomes the fulfillment of a lifetime of longing. This connection between Joseph and Jesus is not accidental. Both were thought to be dead, both exalted in a foreign land, and both became the means of salvation for others. Let's finish with one last thread. The idea of faithful flexibility. Jacob didn't expect this. He didn't plan to leave Canaan, and yet when God confirmed it, he went. That takes spiritual courage. That's something to admire in a faith that's not rigid but rooted. Flexible enough to follow God into new territory, but firm enough to stay true to the promise. Now for some closing threads. If any of these threads stirred something in you, or if you noticed a detail I didn't bring up, I'd love to hear your insights. Drop a comment and let's keep the learning going together. This chapter reminds us that the story of redemption doesn't always unfold where we expect, but God is there in the unexpected, in the foreign land, in the tearful reunion, and in the unfolding promise. Thanks for joining me again. I'll see you in the next episode as we continue this journey of faith and family.